It may not be immediately obvious, but the previous exercise also demonstrated a further type of callable object, and that is the class object. Remember that everything in Python is an object, and that includes classes. We must take great care when discussing Python programs, because class objects and instance objects produced from those classes are quite different things. Let's start a new REPL session and give a practical demonstration using our resolver class. First, we'll import just the class from our module. When we ask the REPL to simply evaluate the imported name, resolver, the REPL displays a representation of the class object. This class object is itself callable, and of course that is what we've been doing all along whenever we've called a constructor to create new instances. So we see in Python, constructor calls are made by calling the class object. As we've seen, any arguments passed when the class object is called in this way will, in due course, be forwarded to the dunder init method of the class if one has been defined. In essence, the class object callable is a factory function which when invoked produces new instances of that class. Knowing that classes are simply objects and that constructor calls are simply using class objects as callables, we can build interesting functions which exploit this fact. Let's write a function which returns a Python sequence type, which will either be a tuple if we request an immutable sequence, or a list if we request a mutable sequence. In the function we just test a boolean flag and bind either tuple or list, both of which are class objects, to our CLS reference using the assignment operator, which we then return. Notice that we must take care when choosing variable names which refer to class objects not to use the class keyword as a variable name. Popular alternatives are the abbreviation CLS and the deliberate misspelling class with a K. Now we can use this function to produce a sequence class with the required characteristics. Here we set the immutable argument to true so that the function returns an immutable sequence class. We can then create an instance of the class by using the class object as a callable, in effect calling the constructor.